So as we go into this, I'd like to introduce our chairman, Ambassador Tommy Koh.
Keep it short, huh?
Ambassador Koh is one of the first people I met when I moved to Singapore. It was literally in the first week, and his energy and his positive energy has been so good for MEI, and he's really been a great partner in helping us get ourselves off the ground, and I think that this conference really proves that to be true. Ambassador Koh is currently Ambassador at Large at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's also a Special Advisor to the Institute of Policy Studies and Chairman of the National Heritage Board and Center for International Law at NUS. Ambassador Koh has served as the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Singapore, Ambassador to the United States, Singapore's Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York, and Ambassador to the United States of America. He had also served as High Commissioner to Canada and Ambassador to Mexico. He was President of the Third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea and Chairman of the Preparatory Committee for the Main Committee of the UN Conference on Environment and Development. Ambassador Koh served as the founding chairman of the National Arts Council and founding executive director of the Asia-Europe Foundation. He was also Singapore's chief negotiator for the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. He acted as Singapore's agent in 2 legal disputes with Malaysia. He's the co-chairman of the China-Singapore Forum, the Japan-Singapore Symposium, and the India-Singapore Strategic Dialogue. He was recently appointed as the rector of a new college, Tembusu College at NUS, and chairman of the Sim Asia Foundation of Credit Suisse. And he is a lover of the arts, and he has helped us immensely with the concert that we'll be all enjoying in just a few hours. Thank you, Ambassador Koh.
That's so flattering. It could do as my obituary, you know. So I'll recommend you to my wife. But it's a very great pleasure to chair the 8th and final panel, which has 4 very distinguished participants. So without further ado, I will introduce the first of our 4 distinguished speakers, Mr. Sultan Sooud Al-Qassemi from the Dubai School of Government. You have 20 minutes.
15.
Oh, 15, sorry. Rana had changed the rule, 15 minutes. But it says, the timer says 20.
Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk about the use of social media in the Gulf during the Arab Spring. Just a little bit of background about social media in the Arab world. Facebook, for example, between January 2010 and December 2010, almost doubled in use from 11.9 million users to 22 million users. Twitter as well, the numbers go from as low as 40,000 users in 2009, Twitter users in the Arab world, to 5.5 million about last month. Now, both Twitter and Facebook, the numbers aren't reliable because they don't generally release numbers. However, this is from industry research. Now, there's a very, very lively social media sphere in the Gulf states. For example, in Kuwait, there's between maybe 200,000 to 300,000 Twitter users, 800,000 Facebook users in Kuwait. And the social media is almost an extension of what happens in the parliament. So you see fights in the parliament. There are also fights on social media in Kuwait. There's the parliamentarians have Twitter accounts, the journalists have Twitter accounts, and citizens have Twitter accounts. And so there's quite a lot of teasing and fighting and a lot of tension on social media. There's one MP who's referred to as the pen because he's always in the pocket of the government. Quite lively. There's a person who has a Twitter account called Shweikh Republic. He invents his own rules as he goes along. I want to talk about Saudi Arabia for a minute, which I think has the highest potential for change in the social media. The number of Facebook users in Saudi is estimated at 3.3 million people. This is January 2011. Again, these numbers are not exactly scientific. The case of one gentleman who I'm very close with, Fuad al-Farhan. Fuad al-Farhan is one of the first people to adopt social media. 2007, he was jailed for 4 months in solitary confinement till April 2008. And the reason was a blog entry in which he said 10 Saudis I do not want to meet. One of them was a minister, one of them was a religious cleric, one of them was Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. So his Facebook account was shut down. He was released, started a new account. Fuad al-Farhan moved on. He's not a bitter guy. He's a swell person. In fact, his popularity only increased with Twitter. He has now 12,000 followers. He was invited after the last Jeddah floods to meet Prince Khalid al-Faisal, the governor of Riyadh. And Prince Khalid al-Faisal told him, please say hello to your followers for me. So you go from one end where you jail this person to the other end where you ask him to reach out to his followers for you. Very quickly, there was a Saudi Day of Rage, March 11th, Yom Haneen. There were 33,000 people on that Facebook page. One person showed up. Khalid al-Johani is almost a hero in Saudi Arabia. There's a YouTube video calling him the bravest man in Saudi. He's a father of an autistic child. He's disappeared. He was taken after the BBC interviewed him. Interestingly, Saudi lost about 300,000 Facebook users in April 2011. Moving on, I'll skip Oman. Qatar, bastion of free speech, jailed a blogger called Sultan al-Khalifi on March 2nd, also for criticizing the emir. The UAE jailed 5 people. They took them to detention. One of them was a blogger for accusing the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi of social bribery. There were 2 pages, very quickly, Qatar and the UAE, calling for the toppling of the regimes in Qatar and the UAE. They had a couple of thousand likes on the Facebook accounts. However, we don't know how many of them were nationals and how many of them were probably disgruntled expats who lived in the country. Now, Bahrain is really the interesting part here. Bahrain has the most active civil society outside Kuwait, maybe in the Gulf region. Bahrain always had a very lively Facebook and Twitter sphere. There was a gentleman called Ali Abdul Imam. He started Bahrain Online, a blog. He had 100,000 daily hits in a country of 600,000 nationals. Wow. Huge internet penetration in Bahrain. His website was shut down after the protest. He was imprisoned. He was released. Al-Wafaq party, which controlled about 40% of the Bahraini parliament, had a gentleman in charge of reaching out to the youth. So this gives you a background of prior to the February 14th uprising. So even the biggest opposition party had a Facebook page. They reached out to the youth. Another one was called Bahrain Hiwar. They had 16,000 out of 150,000 Facebook users in Bahrain. They were able to reach out and get them to come out in the streets. Very, very advanced use, I think, of social media. Bahrain now has about 300,000 Facebook accounts in Bahrain. Once again, I think that some of these accounts are by expats living in Bahrain. Still very interesting. Now, how was social media used during the uprising? There's an interesting distinction you have to make. Gulf nationals, including myself, were very supportive of the Tunisians and the Egyptians. And then the riots and this protest hit home, the Gulf, and then we don't know how to act. What do we do? Do we support them? And if you support them, are you supporting anti-monarchical elements? So what happened, going back, social media was used, for example, to tweet Sheikh Ali Salman, the leader of the opposition, his talk during the Lulu days. Photos were uploaded. There were 22,000 new Facebook users added in Bahrain in February alone. Huge increase of social media. Then crackdown starts, Gulf troops enter, the battle is taken to cyberspace. The most interesting part about social media is this battle. The Interior Ministry establishes a Facebook presence. The Bahrain News Agency establishes a Facebook presence. I must say that Bahrain Foreign Minister has always been internet savvy. He is the only foreign minister in the Gulf and the Arab world who actively updates his own Twitter. So there was always a presence. However, now you have the Interior Ministry coming out. The TRA, which is the Telecom Regulatory Authority, launched a campaign called Think Before You Tweet, Think Before You Post. Is this propaganda? Could you be libelous for the information? Is this appropriate? Are you likely to cause offense? And could it cause others harm? So this was a very soft approach. We're going to move to the hard approach in a minute. Soft approach also includes We Are All King Hamad hashtag, which converted about 10,000 people to change their profile to the Bahraini king to show support for the monarch. Then, however, the hard push started, which is really is the part that concerns me the most as a Gulf national. There's a sort of McCarthyism that started on Gulf social media, and I wrote an article about this issue, which I was heavily criticized for. There was a case of a Bahraini opposition activist. I'm only going to use his Twitter handle, if you want to look him up. His name is Emuds on Twitter. This person was threatened by a member of the ruling family in Bahrain and said, I will come for you and we will find you and get into trouble. The problem is the next day this person disappeared. I know from first-hand source that it wasn't that young man who went for him. He just happened to be wanted by the police on another level. However, what it looked like for everybody is that there is some kind of link between people on Twitter and the government. Reuters reported on May 5th that government Facebook and Twitter pages started. For example, on Facebook, you have these pages that tag opposition leaders, and then they say things like, together we will expose the traitors. And encourages people to go and find them. Tags such as, we cannot live amongst the traitors. Please find their names and expose them so they can be punished. This sort of McCarthyism is quite worrying. Last Wednesday, just 3 days ago, Bahrain Interior Ministry set up a special social media monitor group to follow up people who write on Twitter and social media. Now, just to conclude, we heard a couple of days ago there was an article in Bloomberg in which they said that the Saudis, for example, are using religion, force, and money to counter the revolution. I'd like to add social media to that trilogy. Now, the point I'd like to leave you with is what really explains the Gulf citizens not supporting protests in their home countries when they were so vocal about supporting Egypt and Tunisia. And I think I'm a perfect case study for that. I was completely gung-ho about supporting Egypt and Tunisia. I went on this Time magazine list. Everybody was following me. And then when it came to Bahrain, I was paralyzed. How do I deal with this? I have friends on both sides. And I compared it to having two cousins who are quarreling. Whose side do I take? Thank you very much.
You did not tell us which side you are. As a man who supports women, I'm very pleased that we have one woman on this panel. When I met Dr. Hatoon yesterday, I told her that I was confident that she's the equal of 3 men. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hatoon Ajwad Al-Fassi, who teaches at the King Saud University.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Could you please put the... All right. Yeah, okay. I would like first to extend my thanks to...
Speak louder.
Mike. Okay. I would like first to extend my thanks to Professor Hatoon, to the University of NUS, and members who are behind the scene for putting this conference together. I'm going to, in 20 minutes, I have 20 minutes, by the way. This is wrong. I'm going to speak about Saudi women. Am I in control here or not? Okay. I'm going to speak about Saudi women in this situation of power and resistance. I'm considering that Saudi women are in a situation of resistance. I would say that from car driving demonstration in November 6, 1990, to I Will Drive starting June 17, 2011 campaign is quite a long way. However, addressing the same issue that has not moved a centimeter, but perhaps millimeters, is worth worthwhile. I'm going to jump few parts and go directly to why power and resistance. I think that the Arab Revolution that are spreading around us has really boiled the atmosphere. Thanks to Sultan's paper, who has put us in this feeling. Saudi women were not actually out, or actually, let's say, youth in general were not in contact with what's going on around them, and they have responded in a way that was very interesting, and this is how I want to explore with you. So in this paper, I'd like to address some of the questions that would view how women have dealt with threats, with challenges regarding changes around them, regarding all these movements that were taking place in the Arab world. And then from there, I would say a few things about what I believe that the Saudi women's case represent. Now, I'm not going to go into details about what is Saudi women's status, as much as I would say that I just jump into how she is dealing with all the reservation on her, whether it is citizenship or movement. Right. I was saying that Saudi woman is not, in this paper, I would like to raise, the major issue that I would like to raise in this paper is the trends that Saudi women have taken to resist the assertion that to get their rights in the political, in the economic, in the social, and in the cultural. Some of the main issues that Saudi women are facing and suffering from is the fact that there is no majority age of Saudi women whatsoever. She needs a guardian for life. She's actually in lack of full capacity, for legal capacity in courts. She's limited in education, in workplace. She's limited in movement. There is no minimum age for marriage, and so on. Many of these issues have had some samples that were known and exemplified in the external media. We have some of these samples of constant minor marriages, of forcing divorce for tribal lineage. We don't have clarity on harassment, sexual harassment, or even rape cases. You have very strange laws regarding finding women or even old women with men in what is called khulwa. And so on. There is a continuous. There are continuous cases that make women just don't know how to deal with. And then you have the denial of her movement: no driving, no public transportation. Now, what are Saudi women's response? The fact is that being a Saudi and participant in Saudi women in the response that I believe we are doing, I feel that it's an area that is not very known of. How women are dealing with all these issues, or the fact that they are discriminated against from all sides of society. So I have listed few examples of how Saudi women have worked in the political. I would say that they They have some political resistance, some economic, social, and cultural. And bearing in mind that we don't have any format for civil society. It's not really developed or allowed. So anything that is, most of what Saudi women are doing, they do it in an informal way. Politically, there are demonstrations. This is a very harsh, very difficult word to mention in Saudi Arabia. It's not allowed. And any person, man and woman or woman, will be under really arrest if they do. And so a list of consequences. But Saudi women have actually demonstrated, and there are in different forms of standing in front of Ministry of Interior, for example, or have some sit-ins in front of all branches of Ministry of Interior for either demanding for their prisoners to be released or tried and so on. There are petition writing that have different forms, and this is, I'm not talking only about only the last few months of the Arab Revolution phenomenon, but I'm talking about the last 10 years at least. There are campaigns, different campaigns. With the cyber space, we're starting to have different forms of campaigns, from just verbal networking to more elaborated and organized. Economically, so there are all these examples of demonstrations that started from. We have examples from 2000 for different causes. It has intensified though with the social media in since 2009. We have the example of Whither as one of the Saudi right seekers and Saudi human rights militant, you can say. She has raised so many campaigns. We are very proud of her case. Is very interesting because she showed how women could be creative in finding ways to solve problems. Demonstrations were not allowed. She went alone. She had a solo demonstration in 2006. She wrote petitions. In 2008, when YouTube was first introduced in Saudi Arabia, she was the first to film herself driving and asking for women in 8th of March to go and drive, and so on. There are many examples of what she has done. She's been chosen. She has a long achievement list. Economically, women have campaigned to eliminate and to stop the legal representative of women in business. Business for Saudi businesswomen is not actually value-free. She has to have somebody who represents her. So there were many attempts by Saudi women to network and to join Gulf unions or Arab unions, just to expand their experience and to create some groups or pressure groups. Culturally, socially, there are many things. I have to go quickly. Culturally, the cultural part is also interesting because there are many layers to it. There are these cultural salons that Saudi women developed in the haven of their homes to meet, to discuss. And even those cases were not left alone. Because, for example, with this first example of Al-Multaqa Al-Ahadi, we had who has been going on for 18 years. We had been, like three years ago, asked by the Ministry of Interior to stop meeting for intellectual reasons. Or if you're having any intellectual meeting, it has to be taken. We need to have a permission, actually, even if it's taken part at homes. All right. There are also creative novels, political writing, the press, blogging. There are many Saudi bloggers, similarly to men. I will quickly move to one of the samples of political this is a continuation to what Sultan was saying about the social media. With the social media, Saudi women were able to develop their campaigns and move from one of the very important campaigns that Saudi women are going through right now is called Baladi, which is to regarding encouraging women to participate, not women, but asking for the right of women to participate in the municipal elections. Municipal elections are the only quasi-democratic political participation phenomena that we're having at the moment in Saudi Arabia. It is halfly elected with very limited authority, and it is the second time that Saudi Arabia is having it. The first one was in 2005, and in 2004 and 5, women have campaigned to make this, to allow and to at least to pressurize the municipality ministry to admit that women have the right actually to participate in voting and in running. And this was done in 2004. I mean, the acknowledgement or admitting that we have the right, but we were not allowed. And we were promised that next time we will be included. Now, this time, Saudi women decided to prepare themselves ahead of time. So since so this campaign was formed in March last year, and we planned, well, this is something that I have been part of, and we have gone far away with the pressure that we've made on the government, starting from lobbying before the announcement of registration, to the fact of going on the day of registration. Women went and showed up. They went out actually in about 5 cities in Saudi Arabia at the stations of registration, asking for registration because there wasn't anything in the bylaws preventing them from doing so. Anyway, this goes a long way. After that, law cases were pressed against the Ministry of Municipality. About 3 women now have filed lawsuits, and it's still going. We've been told out loud that we will not be participating, but we haven't taken this as a no, and we are still continuing. And one of the ways that we have, or the alternatives that we are planning on having, is to have shadow municipal councils. Okay, 5 seconds. Okay, and then another group from our group decided on doing something else, encouraging men and youth to go and register. So this is Jeddah Youth 2 Municipal Council. They have actually worked also through the Facebook and through other media as well. So Shabab Jeddah ila al-Majlis al-Baladi. Another website that has been, some bloggers were supportive, or they are working hand in hand with what was going with the idea of municipal councils, is by having this Saudi Leaks site to actually, I can show you the site, that is actually going through observing or following up on all the Saudi ministries' projects and how they are performing them. They are even having a counter here on the left of any project, and they're projecting the countdown time of each project and what is being announced. So they are doing actually the work of accountability for the municipality and other ministries as well. And there are 3 women. There are 3 women bloggers. And then we have Saudi Women Revolution. It has taken a lot of publicity in the last few months. They have started only in February, and I think the use of revolution was very very courageous, I believe, because the word revolution is not very I mean, you have to be very careful with using this word. It's very sensitive, but they were very, very courageous in having it, and then they went into the media. They are actually a group of young women who have broken the barrier of fear. This is what I explain, how I explain all these initiatives that these Saudi women are doing using the social media and using other media and reaching actually to the public. Another one was, and there are different types of campaigns. We have the driving campaigns. We have about 3, 4, 5 campaigns going on at the same time. We have this one. We have another one. Okay, and then we have things on Saudi human rights. Sorry, I'm going about work. And then you have, this is also about driving. But what is interesting about driving is this recent site, which is called I'm Driving on 17th of June. This is how it's called. Women to Drive. It's and the founder of this site, whose name is Manal Sharif. She's been very, very vocal in the last months, actually. On the CNN, in the BBC, she has, YouTube has been used very, very progressively. Like every campaign now is working on having its own YouTube production. And for a woman to have herself on a YouTube is really, again, is a very courageous matter to do. And Manal Sharif has done that and elaborated it, and then something happened. Of course, you know, we have the problem of men who are not very happy with that. So we have, okay, I'll go. It's going, I'm doing it backward and it's going forward. Okay. It's in purpose? Is it in purpose? Huh? Okay. I just want to say something about how some of these things get developed. Now, there is this group who was counter driving this woman who decided that 17th of June, this coming month, will go and drive, no matter what. Not in a demonstrative way, but just any woman with a driving license. And they started on giving women some driving lessons, that they will go and drive. Without any, because there is nothing in the law saying that women should not drive. And then we have this site, very insulting, very insultive, calling that women will be exposed to igal if they, which means that it's a violence, because igal, which is the head's is what is used apparently in domestic violence against women. Yeah, and it is very insultive as well. So they were calling it that there will be igal, حملة العقال, for those who drive on 17th of June. Yeah, they were very, 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 but what is good is that those women who were doing the other side kept on logging into their site and bombarding it with their own videos and things. So here we see that Manal Sharif herself, she drove yesterday. She decided to go and drive before the time, and she had about 15 minutes of filming. Another woman was filming her, actually, Wajiha Al-Whither, and she was telling all her stories with drivers, and then she uploaded it on YouTube, but then she tagged it on. This other woman made this as a response. They had this site, this page, that a shoe will be against the igal will be the shoe. They will hit, and they. It's funny, but it is very, very. So, but then they have changed the shoe. They said it wasn't that feminine, so now they have high heel shoe. And now here's Manal Sharif driving. That was only yesterday. And just want to conclude. I know I've taken a lot of time. Sorry for that. I just want to say that. Saudi women are not silent. They are not passive. They interact with, they respond to what's going on around them. They don't accept that they are treated as minors. They don't accept what society is, how society is treating them. And it is very clear that, and also they don't stop finding ways of responding and defending and resisting. It's very clear that the state is at from one side at the paranoia, but also it feels threatened, and usually women are the case that is given to the traditionalists as a trading solution for any political problem that is taking place in the country. But here, women are not accepting this anymore, and we have seen that with this is happening with Baladi, with the municipality, that is, women are again not allowed. But with driving, interestingly, nobody has stopped these women, and it wasn't only the only case. There were also another case in Jeddah last week. So it seems that we don't know what will happen 17th of June, whether they will leave women alone, whether this will be a status quo thing or not. And this is just really one very small step that we are trying to go ahead. And women have just broken the barrier of fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank Dr. Hatoon for a very fascinating presentation. The next speaker is Dr. Peter Heath, who is the Chancellor of the American University of Sharjah.
Good afternoon. I'd like to add my thanks and praise for the organizers of this conference. And I think I'd like to acknowledge one group that has been unacknowledged so far, which is our moderators. I think all the moderators have been a very distinguished group, and they've done an excellent job. And sometimes they've even managed to keep us on time. So you've done a good job with organizing the moderators as well. I won't get through all my slides. I'm under the tyranny of time, and I appreciate the stress that Dr. Hatoon was under, because we have this clicking machine going, tracking down the minutes. But that's what organization involves. Let me say a few headlines of what I want to say, what I want you to take away, because many of my slides are just quantitative or illustrative of what's going on in higher education in the Gulf. First of all, I think it's interesting that in this final panel, we are talking about education, the role of social media, as a form of protest with our last talk, and then the role of more traditional but yet satellite media. So if these are the ingredients that caused the Arab Spring, then I suppose with this last panel, we are entering into the Singapore Spring of the conference. And despite all the wonderful panels that we've had analyzing government, I think that in future panels, it would be very interesting to kind of balance the governmental focus, especially since governments in the Middle East have often been failures in many ways, and it gets depressing after a while to listen to one governmental failure after the other, but also because much of what is going on in the Middle East is really happening more on the ground level, and it's a fascinating pictures. And one of these is education. I'm going to talk about higher education. First of all, higher education in the Gulf must be understood within the broad context of state formation and the project of education as a function of the state. You have an anthem, you have a flag, you have a national university, you have a school systems. I mean, that allows you to have a minister of higher education, for example, once you have a national university. So the model in general in the Gulf, as in much of the Arab world, is the national state university, much as one finds it in East Asia, Southeast Asia, the university that's our host today, where you go in and you specialize right away for whatever professional qualification that you want. So you enter business right away, you enter medicine right away. And so education has traditionally been conceived as a prelude to professional practice. And this is very much true I think in the Middle East and in the Gulf, where parents traditionally ask, what are you going to do? What are you going to use this for? So it's very, the concept is very pragmatic and functionalist. And Arab states and governments, as well as populations, have often viewed higher education as a kind of intermediary step between the secondary school towards a higher specialization that allows you, therefore, to get a job. And one of the frustrations, I think, in much of the non-Gulf region that we've seen has been the fact that there has been a great deal of access to higher education, but there have been no jobs at the end of the tunnel. We also have to realize that throughout the time of state formation, and let me just do the first slide, this one, which gives you some idea of when these universities were formed, at least in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, you can see maybe the 50s, the 60s, and then a few in the 70s, and then there's a break in the 80s. And it's an interesting question of why all of a sudden in the 80s the whole education project just went off the map. Here are some of the other universities, again, 60s, 70s, Oman and Bahrain in the 80s. And here are some numbers of Saudi universities, students, and how they have grown. Some more numbers. This is, again, Kuwait, Caboose, United Arab Emirates. And let's get back. We will hold off with world rankings for a while. So the project has been going on for decades, starting in the 70s in the Gulf. But we also have to realize that the elite has gone abroad. We've heard many tributes today about the influence that Dr. Hudson has had, and as one person, you have to multiply this to the fact that there has been a continuous process of sending people abroad for education. And so there's also been this idea that if you can afford it, if you're part of the elite, you take advantage of global education, the best education that you can have. And if you're not part of the elite, you make do with what's at home. And this bifurcation has created some interesting dynamics in terms of dissatisfaction with local education. There's also been a tendency to, when there is a lack of more students, but not necessarily more resources, what you do is to either expand the enrollment. Let's see if I can go back to the enrollment. So that you end up with a King Abdulaziz University with 80,000 students, and others in the 30 and 45,000, without really a conceptualization of what you do, what's the scale of magnitude when you switch from a 5,000 or 10,000 to a 40,000 student university. You just push more students into bigger classes and so forth. So there have been, as time and as the younger generation has grown in size and the college-age student size has grown, there's been a tendency to just stuff them more in. So it's kind of like, okay, we have an elite airplane with business class, and then too many passengers were just converted to economy class. Too many people stuff them in standing room only. And this has also created a sense of dissatisfaction. The disparity between external education for the few and mass education, higher education for the general population has been noticeably, the awareness of this has been noticeably increased with the increase of the satellite media, the global media, and also the lack of jobs. So all of a sudden, people are questioning why are we, what is the government doing? I send my kid to any of these, the Saudi universities or Kuwait University, but at the end of the line, there's a job. There's no job. And then there's also a concern that that is very noticeable in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and to some extent Kuwait and Qatar, which is that it was the function of the government to provide these jobs, and all of a sudden governmental jobs are full. This happened in Egypt in the 70s when all of a sudden Cairo University graduates and other graduates who had been guaranteed jobs during the Nasser period were just stuffed more and more into offices in the Mugamma, and encouraged to drive cabs in order to free up the desk that has been stuffed in there. So it's not as bad as all that in the Gulf. But there is a tendency to worry about the quality when there's a growing awareness that at the end there's no job, and also that the quality of education is not as good as you get outside. So all of a sudden you have the concept of global preparation and the skills needed for that, as opposed to local preparation, which signals a failed system. So there's been an impetus for change. Let me talk about quality. Here are the latest QS and webometrics. For those of you who don't know webometrics, it's just an indication for how present your university is on the web. MIT is number 1, by the way. No surprise on that. But the Arab universities have not fared that well until recently, either in the QS rankings, which talk about the top 500 universities, or in webometrics. You see you jump down to 1,000. 1,000 is not so bad, actually. These are all universities in the world. When you get down to 2,500 or 3,500, then you kind of wonder, well, what's going on here with why is this university ranked so low? Now, the last final one, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, I don't want to, this is a disclaimer, they're a very new university. I think in the future they'll be strong on the web anyway. So, why are these universities failing? They focus on content, on memorization, on content, not so much the skills you need, but the mastery of content and a focus on just coming away, knowing the knowledge, but not having the skills. In a recent conference in Qatar, in Doha, the WISE conference, the World Innovation Summit for Education, there was this one panel after the other of people who were looking at global education, and they were talking about 21st century skills. What is that? Analyze information, not memorize it. Think critically, investigate. You can go down the list. This is not an old list. This is what Aristotle was teaching his students. But it's not a list that is being fulfilled by many state institutions in the Gulf or even the broader Middle East. So what we're dealing here with is a lack of confidence by parents in an educational system that has been fostered by the state. And a great frustration by the graduates, the young graduates, when they find out that, in fact, they're not qualified for a job, or whether in much of the Gulf, they assumed that they would get a job somewhere in the government, the army, the governmental services, and yet they find that there have been too many graduates and the government cannot really efficiently accommodate them. Here's some more. So the criticisms are here. Access does not equal quality. Growth without corresponding increase in funding or support. Many of these state systems have come last, just as this panel have come last in priority about what is important. So the army is important, internal security is important, foreign office is important, maybe the media, control of the media is important. Education and health in the Gulf have been given much less focus and much less attention. In the last governmental shift in the UAE, there were only 2 ministers that changed. The Minister of Education became the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Health became the Minister of Education. And the joke was that the Minister of Education went around and talked about training for health and SARS and all these stuff to the teachers, while the Minister of Education talked about staff development and how everybody should become educated. So it also shows a kind of skepticism among the public about this situation. What has been the response? Actually, the response has not been governmental response, and in the Gulf it has not been private sector response. There are some private sector universities in Dubai, but in general there's a great conservatism and desire to make sure an interest in quality control in higher education. So the private for-profit universities have not really developed as they have in places like Jordan or Lebanon, Egypt. So what has happened? We've had new initiatives coming from ruling families or ruling individuals, not through the government. So Gulf University for Science and Technology, American University of Kuwait, the chairman of the board is, I think, the granddaughter of the emir. It's a private university. It happens to be for profit. Education City is a project of Sheikh Hamoza, the wife of the emir of Qatar. So all of a sudden you have this interesting situation where lack of quality is being accommodated by rulers or members of ruling families outside of the government. With the acknowledgement and with the permission of the government, my own university, American University of Sharjah, was founded by Sheikh Sultan Al-Qassemi, Dr. Sheikh Sultan Al-Qassemi, who also founded University of Sharjah. Zayed University is a federal university, but it really grew out of, I think, some frustration with UAE University and an awareness by Sheikh Nahyan, the Minister of Higher Education, that maybe one needed an alternative vehicle for education. And then you have Knowledge Village in Dubai, which is pretty much of a part of the Dubai commercial project, and same as Academic City. And then you have Abu Dhabi coming in with prestige projects in order to, from abroad, or Khalifa University, which is their own project, and setting up new universities parallel to the state universities. Qatar is an interesting example because at one point in the early 2000s, they actually thought about closing Qatar University. They said it was so bad, we'd just close it, and we're bringing these foreign universities. Since 2004, there's been an ongoing project of reform in Qatar University that is really something very interesting to analyze and study because you have the leadership just working through one issue, quality issue after the other, in this very impressive push towards quality. And they still have, they would admit they still have a ways to go, but it's taken 10 years, and it might take another 10 years before you have true results, but they're a very determined group, the leadership of that. So we have issues of quality versus sustainability. I'm about to go red. So I'll look at this. The question is really, you have for-profit, which is not a big issue in the Gulf except in Dubai, which can be sustainable versus self-supporting, such as my university, which is supported by tuition, or UAE University, or perhaps other universities that are supported in a moderate but not exorbitant way by the state system. Then you have low quality, which can temporarily be self-sufficient, but not in the long term because they're low quality, and highly subsidized institutions such as the Masdar Institute, such as KAUST, such as the NYU project in Abu Dhabi, or such as Education City, that can provide very high quality, but it's sustainable only as long as the financial stream is not cut off. Once it's cut off, then they'll have to close. And even if one wakes up today as in, say, Qatar or Abu Dhabi and says, by the way, we've subsidized you 100%, now we're only going to subsidize you 50%, I think most of the foreign universities would say this is not a good deal, and they would leave. So that's really where higher education is. My last point is really that there has been a lot of talk about these Western, American institutions coming in and so forth. There's a lot of focus in the American educational press in places like the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's very important to realize that the agency for reform, whether it's through increasing the numbers of universities, such as happened in Saudi Arabia, or trying to increase the quality, such as is happening in Qatar and UAE University, or trying to find alternatives, this is all local-based. And the idea that a bunch of global universities have made some very nice sweetheart deals in order to increase their range and increase their profits is not really the story from the Gulf point of view. The story from the Gulf point of view is you have dissatisfaction with the status quo, and you have various attempts and various experiments to try to find alternative methods. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heath. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Adel Iskandar from Georgetown University.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ko, for the introduction. I also want to extend my gratitude and I'm incredibly honored and privileged to be here in Singapore. Thank you, Professor Hudson, for the invitation. And also, I want to extend my gratitude to the organizing committee, everybody who made this possible, given the fact that I believe I'm the last speaker of the conference, which comes with a significant amount of responsibility, but also privilege. I have the privilege of preceding Marcel Khalifa, technically, in some way, which means that I will not match the entertainment value. It also means that nobody follows me, so there's no real rebuttal to anything that I have to say. Interestingly, we've sort of come full circle, because at the beginning of the conference, at the opening panel, the discussion revolved around how the revolutions in the Gulf Cooperation Council nations happen to come from above, and how incredibly stable the foundations are. And yet, this panel has discussed to a great extent this tumult that exists in the region on a variety of different levels. And my presentation is, to a great extent, a continuation of the two presentations by both Sultan and Dr. Al-Fassi. So my presentation is entitled Immunity. I think I might actually need that stand. Sorry. It's okay. Thank you. Now I can see. Oh, now I'm just towering over it. Okay, so my presentation is entitled Immunity, Impunity, and Community, the Precarious and Combustible Terrain of New Media in the Gulf. And I want to start off by saying that it is a provocative title in more ways than one, but I think it's important for us to recognize that while there appears to be a fairly clear demarcation between the revolutionary movements in much of the Arab world, or many parts of the Arab world, and the Gulf, there is definitely some carryover effect. And I think it's important for us to note where that carryover effect might exist, without necessarily giving credit where credit is not due. So I want to start off with a discussion around immunity. And of course, this is focused on the media industries and media institutions particularly. The media structures are heavily government-controlled across the GCC area, and I think that goes without saying, with the exception of maybe the Qataris, who were the trendsetters in the mid-1990s by abolishing the Ministry of Information. But nevertheless, the Qatari TV still produces and generates the same kind of bland, unimaginative content that one has grown accustomed to from government broadcasters in the region. The media sector, to a great extent, is infiltrated with regime loyalists, intelligence officials, as well as various informants, and they operate in a variety of different ways that, in the interest of time, I can't elaborate on at this point. The media laws are also incredibly prohibitive and protect against criticism. Of course, this discussion is limited to state broadcasters. When you're looking at it from a transnational perspective, beyond, with the permeable borders between the GCC states as well as the region at large, these patterns are not necessarily consistent because of the competition between each of the respective states. But nevertheless, the media laws on an intrastate level are incredibly difficult to maneuver around, and are created and imposed in such a way to prevent overt criticism of government and to reduce any genuine problematization to basic municipal affairs, things that do not necessarily challenge the upper echelons of government. Another important point is the discussion surrounding the regulatory systems and how incredibly prohibitive they are to the independence of broadcasting and independence of the media. There are a few exceptions, notably in Kuwait and until recently in Bahrain. We understand, of course, from the presentation given by Sultan that Bahrain is no longer operating in the same sort of environment of freewheeling publication and freewheeling broadcasting. But nevertheless, the regulatory systems are prohibitive through licensing. the ratification of and licensing of newspapers as well as broadcast networks is incredibly difficult to acquire. And of course, it tends to be within a larger sort of network of competing authorities and competing interests within each respective state. And the main players, the sort of elite aristocracy and the nobility, tend to play a significant role in determining where the puck lands. And of course, it's important for us to note that in an increasingly privatizing sector, such as the media, and of course, it's not necessarily lucrative in the Arab world as opposed to most other regions, the political economic critique of how non-state media operate and the ownership patterns work is a key determinant of how power is disseminated in the region and the role that privilege plays in determining outcomes. The second point that I wanted to make is with reference to impunity. And of course, this should come as no surprise to anyone, but on almost every index of media freedom or press freedom or freedom of information or freedom of expression, the GCC does not rank well. And of course, Saudi Arabia is near the bottom as among the lowest ranking nations in the press. Of course, they don't get credit for whatever positive, positive role the transnational Saudi press tends to play, because we're talking about intrastate broadcasting and intrastate press. Of course, these rankings come from organizations that in many instances are dismissed as sort of Western instruments that are subject to a rhetoric of Orientalism and things of that kind. But they're, Reporters Without Borders, Amnesty, Freedom House, Article 9, ICFJ, et cetera, But I mean, there's a virtual unanimity in all of this. And I've decided to put the maps just sort of in an illustrative image to show that there is that sort of block of color in the, I think it's the Reporters Without Borders map, the one at the top right-hand corner. It says the black blotch signifies very serious problem. And you will see that there is a consistency there. Egypt, of course, given what we understand about state broadcasting up until January 25th, or actually more particularly February 11th, Egypt ranked fairly low, but at no point is Egypt in the same league as many of the GCC countries. Of course, there are sort of exceptions to this in some ways. The English language press in the region, given the fact that it caters to an expatriate population, tends to be far more critical. But of course, there are changing and shifting demographic dynamics in the region that render the audience and the sort of the target readership in such a way. You've got a population, youth population between 40 and 60% in the GCC area, and they are increasingly an English-speaking or sort of foreign language-speaking community. So they have the privilege to be able to compare content and identify where propagandizing and misinformation is being delivered in the national press, the Arabic language press. This is a continuation of impunity, which I have to apologize, I can't seem to get over it. The international media regime is incredibly problematic, and I'm sort of dividing into three different categories: the international, the regional, and the local, how impunity operates. The Gulf countries do not account for or respond to international criticism on media reform in any way, shape, or form. They resort to counter-hegemonic strategies to undermine the claims and demands of almost every authority globally. The first is criticism of foreign intervention, that we have our ways of doing things, we have sort of an indigenous approach that they simply don't understand the region. And of course, the criticism tends to utilize the position of Western double standards. I mean, most of the organizations, the media criticism and media advocacy and freedom organizations, tend to be situated in Western nations, and so it comes with that kind of baggage. Nevertheless, there are regional organizations that advocate the same sort of views, but nevertheless they are beholden to the same problems. So, for instance, the Arab Center in Cairo, the Center for Freedom of Journalists in Amman, the response is, well, solve your own problems before you try to solve ours. So there is that perspective. The regional impunity element is a little bit more complicated, and it's facilitated largely by the intergovernmental bodies such as the Arab League and many of the regional professional syndicates. So the Journalist Syndicate, which in many ways are reflections of the regional governments and their motivations and interests, and they operate in a very pragmatic way. And then, of course, they have their own sort of legal instrumentation, one of which was a highly problematic document called the Arab Media Charter that was designed and drafted by the Egyptians and the Saudis, with the intent of muzzling some satellite broadcasters, notably Al Jazeera. Of course, this is before the reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which resulted in a shift in the language of Al Jazeera. But during that time, the charter itself was vilified and demonized and criticized quite openly, and eventually became discredited and never actually made its way into the legal paperwork of the Arab League. But nevertheless, it would have been very difficult to utilize. Perhaps it could have come in handy at a certain moment in history, in February and March of this year, when both Arabsat and Nilesat, run, funded, governed, and operated by the Egyptian and Saudi government, could have, in some ways, unplugged some of the satellite television stations that they believed were fomenting the revolution. But the legal premise was not there. And then, of course, lastly, the view of local impunity. There are, of course, there's limited judicial independence in many of the GCC countries, which does not permit journalists, reporters, editors, newspaper owners to take either the state or vice versa to court to allow them to see sort of the rule of law take effect. And so that judicial the lack of judicial independence is deeply problematic. Of course, there is also the tendency to legally reframe these violations. So, for instance, the use of slander, the use of accusations of slander and libel are incredibly easy to deploy to discredit any view. Of course, there are, by extension, criticisms that apply to national security and things of that sort. And then lastly, there's a tendency to resort to national, state, and public security, as well as sociocultural and religious norms of decency. So describing something as deeply inappropriate or not acceptable culturally is a good way to discredit, undermine, and eventually perhaps take the broadcaster or the newspaper or the journalist to court, which in essence creates an environment of curtailment, which leads to self-censorship, perhaps the most innocuous and easiest way to keep silence installed. The third category, besides immunity and impunity, is this notion of community. The tendency is to turn most criticism into a discussion surrounding communitarian, identitarian particularities. So, we're all Egyptians, we're all Saudis, we're all Bahrainis, this is how we operate. Don't shake the boat too much. And of course, it relies on the concentric circles of identity, from family to tribe to neighborhood to locale, sect, faction. The political identification, territorial nationalism, Arab nationalism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israeli sentiment. I mean, you name it. In some cases, contradictory categories are sometimes used to undermine a specific view. But in some ways, they still cater to the same idea, that there is a common community and the community needs to withstand the pressures of dissent. The second is the claim to tranquility, that the suppression of dissent, that it's not really suppression of dissent that explains why the GCC does not actually move. It's really because there is popular consent, that everybody agrees. And of course, this popular consent sometimes derives from the idea that everybody is loyal to the government, and it originates from the notion of asabiyya, that there is a sort of a genealogical lineage that connects people to a common sort of locale, and that the notion of community supersedes and overrides political reform. That, so long as we're able to keep things in place, then political reform is negligible, or at least is not a major priority. the critics and dissidents are almost always described as disloyal in some way. And of course, the examples from Bahrain are befitting in this case. But from arguing that by dislocating them, saying that they don't belong here anymore, they're Iranian advocates, or they're acting in someone else's sort of interests, that they're destabilizing the country, and they're doing it intentionally, that they're breaking rank with the community. And of course, anybody who breaks rank with the community is described as a traitor, and there are punishments for traitorships in the region. The Gulf's conceptualization of the nation as an extended tribe is also part and parcel of this, that there is sort of a monarchical paternalism, that the monarchy is there not only to provide, but also to create loyalty and connections that infiltrate every aspect of society. That the leader, is that intentional? Oh, okay. Okay. Now, of course, what this creates, and you know, Bahrain is a case in point, are competing notions of nationalism. When the protesters first came out on Valentine's Day, of course, their intentions were, what they were asking for was political reform rather than the fall of the regime, and they used the discourse. The top left-hand corner is an image, of course, Bahraini flags, Bahraini discourse. There's nothing particularly undermining. The bottom left-hand corner is an image taken from a campaign by an ad hoc committee created by the Ministry of Women and Youth, saying that we're all Bahrainis. You know, that we need to concentrate on what it means to be Bahraini. On the right-hand side, it's actually it's called Harakhum, which means burning them, and it's a campaign of loyalty to the government and to the regime, and it stands on three particular items, or three parts in the slogan: Allah, Al-Watan, Al-Malik, God, the nation, and the king. And of course, this campaign went on a sort of a vilification witch hunt online, as Sultan described, to identify anybody who was disloyal. In some cases, they went to an extreme by posting photos on Facebook of people who were demonstrating in Lulu Roundabout and asking them to tag people that they know. And once they were tagged, they were either arrested or put on some watch list beyond that point. So it's the utilization of social media in a way that would undermine the protesters. Okay, well, I don't know if I can go through all of this. The new media control element in the GCC area operates along two different parameters, in my opinion. One is the default. On any regular day, you've got basic censorship, blocking of some particular sites, surveillance and monitoring, the development of what would otherwise be cyber terrorism task forces, the tacit acceptance of online criticism as a faucet and an outlet for frustration, but not to the extent that it advocates for any form of significant change. That there are just a bunch of young people having a good time online, befriending one another and sharing photos and videos and things of that sort, but nothing that will shake things up too much. The extraordinary situation is when things get out of hand, such as in Bahrain, and that is when people actually protest. And that's when, of course, the campaigns become a little bit more heavy-handed: intimidation, arrest, torture, improved firewalling, cyber cordons, the deployment of hackers and the use of cyber hackers, misinformation and fomenting online divisions in the ranks of the protesters, in some cases utilizing sectarian language to be able to instill divisions between them and to ensure that they resort to silence as the only option. Of course, what that creates is a relative stalemate, that authoritarianism prevails, but cyber dissidence still remains. And I think it's important for us, when thinking about the impact of social media on revolutionary change in the region, is to actually look at Bahrain as a major turning point in this case. That there is a pre-Bahrain and post-Bahrain era. And it results in a shift in discourse. I mean, when the protesters first came out on February 14th in Lulu Roundabout, they believed that they can ask for exactly what the Egyptians were asking for on day one of the protests on January 25th. And they were not asking for regime change. They were asking for equality, political reform, and things of that sort. And of course, they did not get that. And they did not get it because it wasn't organized in a way that would allow for the development of a common discourse. So now there's a shift. The shift implies that if you're going to ask for a political reform in the GCC area, you have to at least offer some lip service or some tokenistic courtesies to the political authority to ensure that, that you are heard. So, for instance, the campaign that Dr. Al-Fassi described, and the banner on the right-hand corner is that of the Women Will Drive on June 17th, which incidentally has about 7,000 followers on Facebook. This campaign has the picture of King Abdullah on the top right-hand corner, in some ways as if he were hypothetically or symbolically endorsing the campaign. And that, that may or may not be the case, but nevertheless, it is an important part of advocating for change and reform. And of course, the argument is, well, that the GCC is not Egypt. But in some ways, the GCC, activists have learned from Egypt. As Sultan explained, I mean, they've been following the campaigns in Egypt and Tunisia, and they understand how mobilization works. There is a wa'il ghunaiming of the online sort of community and of online dissidents in the region, being able to use anonymity and the public sort of environment in such a way so as to create a critical mass that would allow for the advocacy of change. The prospects, dissidence is the status quo. Consent is no longer a guarantee. The youth bulge is now a youth hulk, in my opinion. That significant change is a virtual inevitability, and that the GCC government must see youth as an asset, not as a burden, to be able to withstand the winds of change. In closing, I want to say that this is really a time for naivete, in the sense that young people are taking major risks, not knowing what the prospects might be. When Egyptian young people decided to go out and protest, they were not asking for revolution, they didn't expect revolution. Anybody in the April 6th movement or the Muslim Brotherhood or any other group, I mean, they would tell you, we did not expect revolution, we did not expect the popularity of the movement to reach that critical mass that would allow for the overthrow and the toppling of the regime. And this is precisely the kind of naivete that will allow these young groups to actually shift the perceptions in the region. That at the end of the day, what they're doing is reminding the authorities that democracy is actually not a Western construct in the manner that they're advocating. That the rights that they're demanding and talking of are an extension of the basic expressions of what is incredibly inalienable. And in this case, the image that I want to leave you with is one of a young woman holding a poster. I mean, of course, covering her face, which may be the only way that she was able to sort of escape the heavy-handed securitization of the Bahraini situation. But at the end of the day, her demands are incredibly simple, regardless of the greater sort of geopolitical and geostrategic complexities of it all. The discussion surrounding cyber dissidents in the GCC area revolves around brinksmanship. And what these young people are doing is reminding their respective states, their respective authorities, that it's not about brinksmanship. It is not about taking the region to the edge of disaster, but rather about incremental change, and that's precisely what they're demanding. Thank you very much.
I thank Dr. Iskandar for his very interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be many questions. I hope there will be questions for Dr. Hatoon on the status of women in the GCC, especially in Saudi Arabia, and then questions for Dr. Heath on university education, and then questions on new media and social media for Sultan and Adel. So let's begin. Let's start with the lady in front, please. Yeah.
I'm Gwen O'Krulik from Trinity University. This was a fine panel and wonderful way to end the conference. Thank you. Hatoon, one of your slides referred to the SWW as a pressure group. What is that? I just don't know. And does the Baladi campaign advocate for women voting in municipal elections or actually running for office? And I know that many Saudi men are now boycotting the elections because women can't participate. Is that campaign spreading or limited to a few individuals? And Sultan, I have a question about the use of social media. Can it only be used to mobilize groups, or can it also be used to actually frame the issues, to give shape and content to the issues? Or is the format too brief to do that? Okay,
thank you. Dr. Hatoon, do you want to answer that question? And then Sultan.
Saudi Women, SWW, is a site called Saudi Women Voice, actually. I don't know what it stands for. It's like a newsletter, and that follows all stories regarding women in Saudi Arabia, and also brings in an annual report. And they have started since 2007, and they have already now two annual reports, very, very detailed and very well done. Election, we're asking, of course, for what the right that we have according to the bylaws, similar to men running and voting. Okay, so and this is what we're asking for, not less. Men boycotting, yes, there is a movement because, as I mentioned, authorities are very. There are many limitations on the authorities that or the power that a council has, and including the fact that actually it is allowed, or it is imperative that the mayor of the city to be a member of the council. To this extent that you have this conflict of interests in this council. And it's true that we are also against and for reforming and having more power in the council. We've been debating whether we boycott. Before we boycott, we have to have the right and to establish our right. And then it's actually, we don't announce now that we're going to boycott. But it is coming in the further step after claiming that we want a change in the power of the council, and then we will boycott as a threatening.
Thank you, thank you, Sultan.
It's a two-edged sword. So social media. So it was used to promote issues, frame the issues. Say, for example, this applies in Egypt, but we are monarchies. It doesn't apply here. So you can frame the issues. It's a two-edged sword. You can also use it to defame people.
Okay, I think second row. There's somebody in the second row. Sorry? 3 questions at a time? Okay, well,
Dr. Hatoon,
you all try to remember the question.
I hope when you drive or when others drive, I have a law office, so make sure to drive directly to the law office if you need a lawyer then. My question is to Dr. Heath. Professor, we've been working closely with a lot of the new initiatives for education, and I still believe we're not getting there, including the Qatar Foundation and the transformation that happened to the Hamad bin Khalifa University. I'm struggling with the idea of applying the liberal arts experience in the Middle East, in the Arab world, the idea of writing, critical thinking, core curriculum. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. It seems to me that the factory line of putting people into professional schools happened way too quickly. They're not ready. The formative years, in a way, is sort of missed. And I wonder if you can share some thoughts on that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question, please.
Regarding attitudes toward democracy and gender, 2 scholars, Engelhardt and Pippa Norris, found out that the attitudes of Muslims and Arabs toward democracy usually runs over 90%, even higher than Western attitudes toward democracy. That is to say, Arabs and Muslims favor democratic change. But when it comes to gender, and this is according to Pippa Norris and Ronald Engelhardt, when it comes to gender, the attitude is a lot lower than the Western attitudes toward gender equality. So my question is the impediment to gender equality social or simply legal and governmental?
Can you please identify yourself?
By the way, my name is Al-Badr
Hatoon, right?
Identify myself. My name is Al-Badr Shatri from United Arab Emirates.
Okay, one more question, third question. Yes, please, the lady behind.
Yeah, I have 3 questions. The first one to Hatoon. I have a friend who was leading also the women driver in 1990. And she now is planning to buy a camel and asked all her friends to ride a camel and go on the streets, because she said this is legal during the Prophet's days and so on. And so it's to what is, yeah, I mean, all this, do you see there is a light at the end of this channel, of this tunnel? When do you think something will happen? That, I mean, the authority or the king will give this permission? Because we, you know, we waited for decades now. And to Sultan about the cyber media, I mean, it's very, very popular in Bahrain. And now, I mean, after demolishing the Lulu roundabout, the 6 pillars that might be, of course, added, it will be 8 pillars now, after Jordan and Morocco. But after its demolition, now we have an electronic Al-Lu'lu'ah. It's a daily newspaper, electronic daily newspaper. So they are defying the system by using this cyber. And it's also the third one to Dr. Heath regarding King Abdullah University. I saw that it's the lowest, I mean. They spent billions on constructing this one, and they brought international leading professors, as they said, and all of a sudden we see it at the end of the ladder. So, and also about the new school, I mean, the trend in the EU and Qatar, that the English language is replacing the Arabic language, even in government schools. Some people don't see it very healthy. What do you think of all this? Thank you.
Thank you. I think 2 questions for you, Peter. Yeah, and then the question on Bahrain, maybe I'll open it to the panel.
Yeah, I'll try to take care of all the questions directed to me. In terms of liberal arts education, I mean, you're talking to a product of liberal arts education, so there's a bias there. What I would try to say more objectively is that 2 things. One is that the infatuation with the concept of American education and putting American in front of any university, and this happens a lot, say, in Jordan and Lebanon, where the word American means you're going to be a successful education. These are for-profit, sort of low-level for-profit, indicates that there's an awareness that something's going on with this liberal arts, even if we don't understand it. The success of the graduates from the American University of Sharjah or the American University of Cairo speaks for itself, because there are, and probably AUB as well, that's one group that has, if there are problems with employment, their problems are much less. And we know from a fact that 60% of our alumni are employed, and the other ones are probably choosing, if they're female and starting families, choosing not to be employed. And that this is a fairly new university. So there's something going on with liberal arts education, and which is also testified by the infatuation with the Georgetown or others in Qatar or something. Whether it's what it is that's really understood, or how this is absorbed into ministries of education and higher education to try to think about what are we doing right and wrong, I see much less of that in the most important country, which is Saudi Arabia. It happens in Qatar, it happens in the UAE. The other countries I know less of. Now, in terms of King Abdullah, this is really unfair to put it there, because it's just a new university. You know, it can't go up in rankings. This is webometrics, which means how much data do you have on the web. And with a new university, it's limited how much you can do. It's the problems that King Abdullah University of Science and Technology face are really the social context. Can you have a successful university that's sitting there in isolation as if it were on the moon, more or less? And how can this succeed? And a good example of this is you can have gender equality and all sorts of freedom, academic freedom within the sphere of King Abdullah University. But when you're a scientist of biology trying to get an enzyme in through the postal office in Jeddah, And they look at it and say, well, we don't care whether it's 48 hours or 72 hours. I don't like this university. Well, let's delay this for a week. Then the biologist is going to say, I'm leaving. I mean, I can't work in this atmosphere. So the duality of the situation there is going to be problematic. English and Arabic is a huge problem, especially in the coastal Gulf. I mean, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. And it's recognized as a problem. I can talk about possible solutions, but I don't think anybody is really, including my university, dealing with this in an effective way. It's an identity problem, and it's an extraordinarily important question, but it would take a long time to discuss it.
Okay. You want to answer?
Okay, your question was, Mr. Shah, whether it is social or legal that the gender problem we're having in Saudi Arabia. It's actually both. It's true that we have social, religious interpretation, very, very narrow type of religious interpretation that looks at gender relations that we are governed by. But at the same time, the state also admits or accepts many of these interpretations and puts it in its laws, whether it is the civil laws or the labor law, or we don't have actually a proper codified laws in Saudi Arabia, but we have different bodies of legal structure in Saudi and many of them refer to or put limitations on Saudi women, especially in areas of mixing or areas of guardianship. Or movement, and even movement. Although there is nothing in the law of traffic to say that women should not drive, but there is this circular that was issued by the Ministry of Interior in 1990 after the demonstration of 47 Saudi women in Riyadh streets, and it says that women are not allowed, in addition to the fatwa. So they go hand in hand. But it is not true when we have officials coming out and saying that it is the society who doesn't want Saudi women to progress or to move or to do this or that. It is actually, there are these laws that are, sometimes they are not very clear, or people have had them for a long time, and they are just forgotten about. But they are used by people or by administrations that find it in their interest to do that. So segregation is actually by law that women in workplace or especially we're talking about public sector, education and jobs should not be in a mixed situation. So that has limited education totally and made this phenomenon of CCTV as a medium of teaching female students, which adds to the burden of higher education here. This is an element that is it's affecting especially female students. So when we're talking about problems of higher education, it is it is doubled for women. So Munira, the light at the end of the tunnel, I see it actually with youth. With this generation of Saudi women they have been raised in a way that they don't carry the same fear that we had. Although in 1990 women really drove very bravely and they broke lots of taboos. But what happened after that, with all the discrimination that and the assaults that they received, put Saudi society in fear of repeating the same experience. But those women, 20 years later, they are a bit far away from that experience and they don't remember it. Some of them haven't been born. So they are doing something about it, and they are just they're just doing it without waiting for any permissions from anybody. And I'm just watching. I can't really do that much. It's a very interesting phenomenon that we've seen. These young women who are started to go out in the street and drive and film themselves without fear, because there is always this fear of showing your name or even your picture or an image, and here with the whole complete video, they are very courageous. I just want to add something about the cost question. Yes, it's also, and the biometric system that Dr. Kesh was referring to, it's actually not completely accurate as a way of measuring the level of how a university is doing, even if you have it this much represented on the web. What happened with King Saud University, for example, as a university who hit the highest amongst Arab universities in this system, actually came out of, I don't want to call it cheating, but it's a way around it, where they have actually invited Nobel Prizes and professors from all over the world to come and join the university, at least even for a semester or for a lecture, and then they will be part of the, actually, with all their past and credentials and all of that, the university is just added to its achievements. Yeah. And in addition to that, they're forcing all faculty, students to use the internet and have web pages. Suddenly, out of no, we had very high incentives by having a free laptop if you install a web page in a limited time. So they worked very hard in this sense. But
it worked too.
It worked. Well, it worked, but it doesn't really reflect true quality. This is the problem.
Yeah. Rana, we have time for 3 more questions. I see a lot of hands.
It's the last one.
Huh?
I have 2 here. So.
You got 2 there? Okay, let's.
I can't say no to my boss.
You can't say no to your boss. There's a conflict of interest there. You know? But we should get some questions on the back. That's all. Yeah, okay.
Okay, a question mainly, I think, for Sultan and Adel. I had the impression from both of your talks that social media and the technologies associated with that kind of communication and mobilization and framing and so forth are in fact rather vulnerable to being degraded or shut down entirely by the authorities. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little further on sort of the durability of these forms of expression, particularly at a point where we may be at now, where public peaceful demonstrations are running up against tanks and harsh responses, leading people perhaps to say, okay, we can't, it's too dangerous to go out in the street, but we can still communicate and mobilize electronically. But from what you were saying, I had the impression that maybe it's actually quite possible for the authorities to shut that down as well. And if that were to be the case, then might one think that this extraordinary historical wave of protest is going, in effect, to die out?
Okay, thank you. Anthony.
Hi. This question is for Sultan Saud and Dr. Peter Heath. If you could explain the rupture of the relationship in the Emirate of Ras Al Khaimah and George Mason University, whether this was an aberration or an exception, or whether the issues that brought that about are typical of other tensions between foreign universities and their local partners. And the view related to that in Oman, where their criticism of Abu Dhabi and Qatar is that it seems unseemly that what has lured these Western universities to Abu Dhabi and Qatar is because the arrangements are impossible to fail economically, financially, and profitably, because the arrangements are cost plus, which do not imply a full commitment in terms of usness or partnership between the two, but rather somewhat more one-sided and beneficial to one of the parties than to the other.
Okay, thank you. I think Rana, we'll take all questions. Yes. Then I'll ask the panel to choose some of the questions you want to respond to.
Thank you. Yes, Farid Al-Attas from National University of Singapore. Two questions, one for Dr. Al-Fassi. You gave many examples of individuals, of women who campaigned, who demonstrated, and so on. Could you say something about some of the more serious repercussions that they suffered, particularly in terms of responses from the authorities? And also, could you say more about, I saw something you put on the slide about khalwa laws and punishments for that. Maybe you can say something about that. And then my other question is for Dr. Heath. I'm very sympathetic to your analysis of the problem of what you call failed universities. And I think you referred to some of the structural problems. But I would like to get your thoughts on the following, that apart from the problems you mentioned, there is also a cultural problem. And that is the alienation from tradition. I give an example from my own field, which is basically the study of Ibn Khaldun. What you find almost throughout the Arab world is virtually no development of a Khaldunian perspective. What you have is what one Orientalist called a forerunner syndrome. Ibn Khaldun was identified as a founder of sociology, economics, geography, and many other fields. He was identified, boasted about, and then, left, what do you call it, neglected after that and not further developed. So you don't have a tradition of Khaldunian sociology that has developed that, involves development of his ideas, application to contemporary issues, and so on and so forth. That's just an example. The same thing is true of other so-called founders of disciplines. So this alienation from tradition, I think, is probably a more serious problem that will not necessarily be dealt with, even if the structural problems you referred to are solved. Your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you, Farid. Next.
Thanks. David Mednikov from the University of Massachusetts, which is number 65 on Livermetrics, and Harvard, which is number 2. A basic question that ties a lot of what everybody said together. Liberal arts education is great. I love it. I had a great experience doing it in the Gulf as well. But it seems to train exactly the sort of people that the rest of the panelists are talking about that the government is now trying to repress. So my question is, are there going to be pressures now from the governments to try to control exactly the sort of liberal arts critical thinking that we all love so much, but also is doing such a great job of making these governments afraid? Thanks.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Yes, just a short question for Dr. Heath. I was reading someplace that in Qatar, with all these branch universities of the Western ones, that in one way they're failing, namely that the Qatarian students cannot get into them because their grade point averages are not high enough, their language skills are not high enough, and so on. So are we seeing actually, and then I was reading something about that the government in Qatar, they needed to improve all the primary schools in order for the students to get into the universities. So are we actually seeing by importing universities from outside, a positive spiral where the government has to invest a lot of money in their primary schools in order to upgrade them, to give the students these skills for the 21st century, as you called them, and then they can access the universities. Is that what we're seeing?
Thank you. Thank you. Next question.
Sorry. Maybe this should be our last one.
Hi, Faiza, and I'm with the Middle East Institute. My question is for Dr. Iskandar. I just want to make one observation and one quick question. Observation is, it's interesting that we are listening to your presentation on lack of media freedom and regime-controlled media in a country that, to a certain extent, also controls the media. Although mainstream media, although we have more openness in the internet, on the internet. Okay, that's the observation that I want to make. And my question is, like yesterday, Dr. Greg Kors was saying that the winter of the Arab discontent is puzzling academics, like what explains their sudden protests and uprising. So do you think it's actually the new media that is what explains the Arab winter of Arab discontent? Thank you, that's all.
Okay, thank you. No more, Rana? But there's a gentleman. Okay, enough? All right, you're the boss. Those of you who would like to ask questions and have been denied the opportunity to do so, please see Rana after the... So we have many questions. So I will just go down the table and I'll start with Dr. Hatoon.
Okay, thank you for Mr. Dr. Attas. Some of the repercussions is women can lose their jobs. They will be taken to stations to write on a letter that she will not do this again. Sometimes a letter will be also sent to her job. If she's staying in her job, a letter will, so it will be added to her file. She will not be able to leave until a guardian will come. So if she has done whatever or demonstrated without their permission or their knowledge, she will be, it is this person who has her guardian has to come and receive her. This other person has also to write on a, and then sometimes a passport could be revoked for a certain period of time. Sometimes this could be extended to her family, her either father or husband. Those women who drove in the 1990s, they lost their jobs for 2 years, and then they were prevented from traveling, and so. In addition, these are you could say they are minor things to the fact that they were slandered on in mosques, in Jumu'ah sermons. The Khalwa laws, there is also a part of the I don't know where exactly this Khalwa law is in the Saudi laws, but it says that a woman should not be should be left alone with somebody who's not her mahram. So that's why she has to be always accompanied if she's traveling. Well, when she travels, she has to have the permission of a guardian, but she's not traveling with him. So a khulwa could happen. But the case that I was referring to, it is problematic. It's a problematic situation. But it is part of the fact that women should not mix with men, and that the minute a woman is always suspected. So the minute she's in with the man, then things could happen. But this case happened with a 75-year-old woman who's not Saudi, married to a Saudi. And she was convicted by the court of Hayl of being in khalwa with a 25-year-old man who she said that he's her son, breast son, but then milk son. But he anyway, it's disputed, but the problem is that she's been convicted as guilty, and she had about 300 lashes and has to leave the country. Although you have, of course, verses in Quran saying other things, but and it made a big story in the country and outside. But we didn't get to any solution. Actually, the verdict was not implemented, was not executed on the woman. This is what I understood from her lawyer. But the laws themselves haven't changed, and the precedence is there. So a lawyer, a judge could repeat this again. Regarding pressure over government, this is David's question for the whole panel. I think, of course, critical thinking is monitored even before having these new institutes. Maybe there are ways now of going around it. We speak out loud about the way that there is a need to face the problem of freedom of speech and academic freedom, and we talk about it out loud. But when it comes to implementation, there is, of course, always this sensitivity.
Thank you. I'm just going to comment about the vulnerability of social media. Yeah. I think, if I just remind you, Bahrain Online was banned and blocked in Bahrain for many years, and yet it still had 100,000 visitors a day. So there's always a way around, there's always a proxy. I think it's just going to progress into a game of cat and mouse. And I think the only way is for the Bahrainis, for example, to recognize, like Prince Khalid Faisal did, the power of social media, and maybe approach these people and talk with them, and hopefully through talks and discussion, the situation will be resolved.
Okay, Adel?
Okay, Professor Hudson's question. I would agree with Sultan to a great extent. The problem here is literally the inability to control every facet of the social media entirely. There are always ways to circumvent these structures. If you were to detain the bloggers, to shut down their websites, from proxy sites to, look at the situation with Egypt. The Egyptian government went through incremental securitization procedures in a span of 18 days that resulted in a complete shutdown. The absolute worst case scenario happened. And they shut down the internet entirely, as well as mobile telephones for 24 hours, and yet we had some of the largest protests during that particular period. But the question here is, to what extent can capacities be built and constructed and mobilized online before any action is taken? And that's really the lesson from Egypt. The lesson from Egypt is that you had a perfectly integrated system. You had the convergence of the grievances on the ground with those who are online, and there's a continuity in rhetoric, there's a common understanding that action needs to be taken, and those who are online are able to communicate to those who are offline. And then, of course, there is the issue of timing. So really, it's all about capacity building, and then the use of anonymity at a very early point to ensure that you are not the target of scrutiny and demonization, and of course any major legal restrictions, and then be able to go beyond that. But I think this is at the risk of sounding like Hillary Clinton, but really at the end of the day, internet freedom is an inevitability. There's no way around it. Of course, the major problem for a lot of the GCC countries is that economic viability is on the other side of this spectrum. They need to have the capacity to again, the issue of nationalization and economic competitiveness for the nationals in each respective country is a large part of that, which I think in a way answers the question that Dr. Mednikov is posing about liberal education. On one side you've got this freewheeling system that tries to instill a liberal education, but in some ways does not necessarily want to communicate critical thinking skills specifically if they're going to be focused internally or domestically. But nevertheless, it's an inevitable outcome, largely because they are subjected to the same amount, the same kind of discourse. And of course, there is a role there is a role that tends to be undermined and overlooked, which is the popular culture. I mean, young people are now listening to everything from, heavy metal to rap, from all of, the role of the Rotanas and the MTVs, and these are, the young people are being educated in a completely different way these days, and to a great extent, it's instilling sort of a new sort of sense of citizenship and expectation on the part of their respective communities. So there is that economic capacity and wanting to create a viable sort of citizenship that can be competitive to replace the expatriate population at the higher sort of echelons of the institutional hierarchy, but to do so without necessarily shaking things up too much, which I think is an equilibrium that's very difficult to actually strike. And then the last comment with regards to Faiza's question about the winter of discontent and the issue of, again, it's important to not, think of this through sort of a technological deterministic standpoint that the social media actually, or the online communities, are the ones that made these revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt successful. But they are tools. Nobody, the telephone played a significant role in all of this, and yet nobody calls this a cell phone revolution or an SMS revolution. So I think it's important to note that the media, the new media's role is one of facilitation, of organization, of mobilization. And in the absence of social media, there is a good likelihood that other capacities, other instrumentations could have been used equally as well. The reason why the numbers swelled in Egypt is because people like April 6th movement were going out into the streets and clapping their hands and calling on people to come out from their balconies. That's how they were able to take the demonstrations from 5,000 to 15,000. And then, of course, satellite television played a significant role. So it's a convergence of the technologies, it's a convergence of human will, and of course, they don't necessarily represent the majority of the population, but again, there is the need for us, both as scholars and academics, as well as sort of active participants of public life, is to understand that at the end of the day, there is absolutely no way to restrict human will when there is sort of a common purpose. And the question is, well, is there common purpose? So in the case of Singapore, if I may venture into that territory, is there a common will to see reform through? And is there the ability to organize and mobilize in a significant way to demand for change? But at the end of the day, I think that the Singaporean government is practically incapable of controlling the cyberspace. And I think there's evidence of that. And I don't think it really tries. In fact, trying and failing is actually worse than not trying at all.
Right. Peter?
There's one specific comment, but I would just add one thing about the social media. In Syria, I think the largest social media for mobilization is the mosque, and it's kind of hard to do away with Friday prayer. Yeah. So, yes. And it's immediate. People know when it is. People know what happens after the mosque. So there are alternative mechanisms. In terms of the particular case of Ras Al Khaimah and George Mason University, each of these projects is its own story, and it's important not to generalize. That was just a financial deal that has gone bad, partly because the plot of land that was designated by the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah ended up being, it was impossible to connect it to either water or electricity, and so they waited, and negotiations and things just kind of fell apart. With the Michigan State, which is another example, there were certain assumptions going in terms of student numbers in 2007. 2008 happened, and it just was the wrong environment. So each of these stories, I don't think one should jump to any conclusion about. I think Michigan State got a bad press as going in and wanting to do this for money, when in fact they were promised a certain financial situation, free rent basically, and in order to set up things, and things went wrong. The hardest question really is, and it's the same thing with Qatar and the financial stability of the education city. When you talk to Qatari officials, they say, yes, this is costing an enormous amount of money, but we wanted, the number of students involved is about 1,200 total of the 7 universities that are offering, the American universities that are offering programs there. The amount of Qataris is probably about 450. So it's not bad. The amount of Qataris in the Cornell, Wales medical school is a half dozen, and the number of Qataris after, say, 8 years that have actually graduated from the medical school is 0. In fact, the number of students, Qatari students, that have actually entered the medical school after the preliminary 2 or 3 year program, or at least gotten to past the first year of the medical school, is 0 at this point. This is really a cost risk analysis by the government of Qatar, saying that we had to stir things up. And we had to create the kind of cycle of improvement, starting with K through 12, all the way through the university system. And to do that, we needed benchmarks. And rather than talk vaguely about benchmarks from a distance, we're going to bring benchmarks here. We can afford to do it. We'll spend enormous amounts of money to do it. But the end result, the end target is actually Qatar University and the local state, I mean the K through 12 system in terms of improvement. And they're willing to take enormous cultural and social risks in order to achieve these ends. Abu Dhabi is a bit of a different story, Sharjah is a different story, and it would be too complex. The problem with heritage is the biggest problem of all. And actually, the challenge for a university, and I'm someone who's, I'm a scholar of medieval Arabic literature and culture. I wrote a book on Ibn Sina. I know exactly where you're coming from. I cut my teeth on Ibn Khaldun, among other things. So actually the problem of the heritage is finding qualified people to teach it. It's a remarkable problem. But you have a situation, and this is something that we faced at AUB when I was the provost there, but I was a member of the Arabic department, and the Arabic department would look at individuals applying for the job, and they say, look, we have a choice. We have people from Arab universities that have been trained to memorize 100,000 verses of Arabic poetry, but can't think about them and can't talk about them in any way. And we have these foreign scholars like me, whose Arabic is not up to the standards of what we want, and whose knowledge of the literature and the tradition is not, in some ways, as authentic as we want. They actually kind of missed me once I left. I mean, I was teaching, they begged me to teach at one point because they needed a person. They stuck me in the classroom, and then they found the results weren't that bad. But it still bothered them to be an Arabic department having to employ a non-Arab in order to purvey the tradition. So I think it's possible, easily possible, to integrate the tradition into the curriculum. That's not the problem. But to get the right combination of individuals to teach it is more of a challenge. But I think you've hit really what the challenge of Arab education is, at least in the Gulf, where there's such a pervasiveness of English, and it's so cosmopolitan, and you have such a large expat population in many of the places. This is really the problem. I have encountered an individual who was a major Qatari businessman who was speaking to his 6-year daughter in English. And I said, why are you doing this? I mean, we were speaking Arabic half the time with each other, and he was speaking to his daughter in English. He said it's simpler for her. So there's a real problem.
Okay. Rana, will you all join me in thanking the panel?
If I can just invite Ambassador Ko to also enlighten us with a few closing remarks before we close.
I'm not prepared. It's almost 6:20. I think I should try to finish by 6:30 so you have a chance to wash your face before we go and hear the great Marcel Khalifa. But Rana is my boss, and she asked me if I would just say a few concluding remarks and bring this conference to a sweet conclusion, so I will do that. In accordance with my wife's instruction, I will just make 3 points. First, I would like to congratulate the MEI team led by the chairman, Li Ziyang, Michael Hudson, Verghese Matthews, Rana Khoury, Mary Stoneacre, and all the others for having put together a wonderful conference. I've been here for 2 days, and I must tell you, Michael, that I learned a lot. And I hope that you will be encouraged by the success of this inaugural conference to consider doing another one. But next time, I hope that we will have many more non-specialist Asian scholars and Asian public intellectuals who will join us. My second point is that in June 2005, I had the great privilege of chairing the first Asia-Middle East dialogue here in Singapore. And it was such a wonderful experience. I wanted to just share a few reflections with you. After 2 centuries of mutual isolation, the Middle East, which includes North Africa, Turkey, and Iran, and the countries and peoples of Asia have rediscovered one another. And when we met in Singapore in 2005, we reflected on the fact that our relationship is a historic one that goes back 1,000 years. But it was interrupted by the period when Asia was colonized, it was divided, and it was separated from the rest of the world. Today, I would say that the relationship between the Middle East and Asia is not just sentimental. It is based upon many convergence of interests. Singapore is a microcosm of Asia. And if you take Singapore as a microcosm of Asia, you'll see that our connections to the Middle East are based upon partly history, religion, Islam, which is a major religion in this region, partly based on economics, because Asia has now become the largest consumer of your primary exports, oil and gas, and partly based on blood. We heard yesterday this wonderful narrative by Ismail Alatas about his one family. But Farid here, my good friend Farid Alatas, is another member of the Arab diaspora in Southeast Asia. And the Arab diaspora is a living reality of this region. If you have the time, I urge you to visit Arab Street in Singapore to see how vibrant the whole area has become. Visit Haji Lane, visit Muscat Street, visit the Sultan Mosque, and how young Singaporeans have once again embraced the Arab world. And not just the Arab world, we're also interested in engaging Iran, which is a great civilization, and engaged Turkey. My final point is this, that I know very little about your region, but as I listened to you for the last 2 days, I cannot help but think of the similarities and differences between the 6 countries of the Gulf and your regional organization, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and the 10 countries of Southeast Asia and our regional organization, ASEAN. We are a little older than you are. We are 44 years old. We are a little larger than you are. We have a combined population of 600 million. But like you, we are in search of development, and we are in search of good governance. I don't want to talk about democracy, because if I reflect on my own family, 2 members of my family, Vietnam and Laos, are still ruled by the Communist Party. 1 member of my family, Brunei, is a monarchy with no legislature. So ASEAN cannot say we are a family of democratic nations. But what unites us is that we want rulers, no matter how they are chosen, who want to serve their people rather than themselves. We embrace certain common values irrespective of the forms of our government. We embrace the value of education and empowering our people. We embrace gender equality. We embrace transparency and integrity. And we look every year at the transparency index and whether we have made progress or we have stagnated or we regress. We look every year at the Human Development Index and ask, are we making progress? Are the people of our country better off this year than they were last year? We look at the Gini coefficient and worry whether or not we are closing the social divide, or are we are becoming more divided between the have a lot and have less. So I would say that we can't talk about democracy, but let's talk about good governance. Let's talk about the rule of law. Let's talk about non-corruption. Let's talk about empowering our people. Let's talk about gender equality. And I want to just conclude by saying that my hope for the GCC is that the GCC will play the same role in your part of the world as ASEAN has tried to play in this part of the world. And what has ASEAN tried to do? It has tried to keep peace in Southeast Asia. Over the last 44 years, we have, generally speaking, succeeded in keeping peace in our region. There are, of course, occasional skirmishes between neighbors, as we saw recently between Cambodia and Thailand. But the rest of us, the 8 of us, put tremendous benign pressure on them to stop fighting, to come to the negotiating table, to accept the emplacement of Indonesian observers on both sides of their borders. And I think the GCC should try to do that, keep peace in the family. But you should maybe reflect on our experience, which is that we realize that peace in Southeast Asia is connected to peace in the larger region. And so we act as a convener. We convene every year a meeting, not just of the 10 leaders of ASEAN, but we bring together the external stakeholders of this region. And so we invite the leaders of Japan, of China, of South Korea, of India, of Australia, of New Zealand, and this year we will invite the leaders of the United States and Russia to join us. In this way, we have brought all the stakeholders who have a stake in the peace and prosperity of our region to meet annually with us. In this way, we try, in an Asian way, to reduce the deficit of trust between China and Japan, between China and India, and between China and the United States. I don't know whether it is possible for GCC to do something similar, but those of you who've come from the Gulf may want to reflect on what we in Southeast Asia have done. Keep peace in the region, keep peace in the larger Asia Pacific, give a stake to all the external major and great powers in the peace and prosperity of this region. I thank you all very much for being here yesterday and today, and I thank Michael for giving this opportunity to share some concluding reflections with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and to all our panelists. I would like to tell Dr. Heath that when you're last, that doesn't mean you're bottom on the list of priorities. It can mean you're, they always say that the best comes last, all right? Okay, save the best for last. And on that note, I know I've become a bad guy throughout all this, and I'm sorry. Dr. Hudson just whispered to me, Wallah inti awiye, which means, goodness, you're strong. And just the other day when I met Marcel at the airport, Marcel Khalife, he said, "Wallah, inti awiya, jabtini ala Singapore." He said, "Goodness, you're strong. You brought me to Singapore." So let's go enjoy him. We brought him all the way out here. And thank you so much for what's been a wonderful conference. Thank you to the MEI team who have been behind the scenes, some of them. Most of them are already at the conservatory. Thank you to the participants who flew out here from all around the world. And Dr. Hudson and Mr. Lee, thank you.